The weekend was coming, and the couple had been talking for days about hosting a family dinner. It was the first time they were inviting everyone over since moving into their new home. The wife had been planning the menu all week, making lists, watching cooking videos, and testing small recipes in advance. She wanted everything to be perfect because both families were coming together under one roof. Her husband had suggested keeping things simple, but she wanted to cook from the heart, something that would make the night memorable. That morning, she woke up early, tied her hair back, and started preparing the ingredients. The sound of chopping vegetables filled the kitchen, followed by the smell of fresh spices. She hummed quietly to herself, imagining the moment everyone would taste her food and smile. She wanted her mother-in-law to feel proud and her husband to feel happy seeing everyone enjoy the meal. The husband woke up later, stretching lazily. When he saw her already busy in the kitchen, he smiled teasingly and said, "You're acting like you're feeding a royal family." She laughed softly and said, "It's just one night. I want everyone to feel welcome." He shrugged and went to make himself coffee. As the hours passed, she kept cooking without rest. She made traditional dishes, snacks, and desserts that everyone loved. The kitchen was warm, filled with the smell of butter, garlic, and roasted spices. By afternoon, the table was almost ready. She checked every dish carefully, adjusting flavors, adding a touch of salt here and a sprinkle of herbs there. She looked tired but happy. Her husband came in and joked, "You look like you've opened a restaurant here." She smiled faintly, but inside she felt nervous. She wanted him to be proud of her, not just joke around. As evening came, the doorbell rang. Family members started arriving one by one, the house filled with laughter, hugs, and chatter. Her parents brought sweets, his parents brought flowers, and soon the living room was full of warmth. The wife moved between the kitchen and the guests, serving drinks and snacks, making sure everyone was comfortable. Her husband was in high spirits, laughing loudly, greeting everyone warmly. He liked being the center of attention. Dinner was served soon after. The table looked beautiful, full of colorful dishes, freshly baked bread, and steaming bowls of food. Everyone took their seats, excited to try the meal. The wife stood there quietly, watching as plates were filled and spoons clinked. Her heart was racing. It wasn't just food for her. It was her way of showing care. Her mother-in-law was the first to taste the food. She smiled and said, "This looks wonderful. You've really worked hard." The wife felt a wave of relief. But before she could thank her, the husband spoke up with a grin. "Careful, everyone. Don't expect restaurant quality tonight. She's still in training," he said jokingly. A few people chuckled softly, but the laughter didn't feel right. The wife froze for a second, her smile fading just a little. She tried to laugh it off and said, "It's okay, I'm still learning." Her husband continued, picking up another dish. "What's this? Did you follow the recipe or did you just make it up as you went?" He chuckled again, unaware that his words were cutting deeper than he thought. The wife looked around the table. Some of the guests looked uncomfortable. Her father gave her a gentle nod as if to say it was okay. She forced a small smile and said softly, "I tried something new. Hope it's good enough." The husband waved his hand playfully and said, "I'm just kidding. Don't take it seriously." He didn't mean to be cruel. To him, it was just teasing. But the tone, the timing, and the crowd made it sting. As dinner went on, everyone complimented the food. Her dishes were flavorful and comforting. Even those who laughed earlier admitted they liked the meal. But the wife couldn't shake the feeling of embarrassment. Every time someone praised a dish, she waited to see if her husband would say something else. And he did. "Well, I helped her with tasting, so if it's good, I deserve half the credit," he joked, raising his glass. Everyone laughed again, and she looked down at her plate, pretending to smile. Inside, she felt small. It wasn't the joke itself that hurt. It was the way it turned her effort into entertainment. She had cooked with care, thinking of every guest, hoping her husband would say something kind. Instead, she became the subject of his jokes. After dinner, she got up to clear the plates. A few family members offered to help, but she politely refused. In the kitchen, she took a deep breath and stared at the sink full of dishes. She could still hear laughter from the dining room, her husband telling another story. For a moment, she wondered if he even realized how she felt. Her mother-in-law came to the kitchen quietly and said, "The food was wonderful, dear. Don't take those jokes to heart. He just likes to make people laugh." The wife nodded and said, "I know. I'm glad everyone liked the food." She smiled gently, but her eyes were distant. The older woman gave her a small hug before going back to the others. When everyone left later that night, the house grew quiet again. Her husband stretched on the couch, scrolling through his phone. "That went well, didn't it?" he said casually. She looked at him for a moment and then nodded. Yes, it did. He didn't notice her voice sounded different. To him, everything was fine. She went back to the kitchen and started washing the dishes. Her hands moved slowly in the warm water. Each plate reminded her of the hours she had spent preparing, hoping to be appreciated. She wasn't angry. She was just tired, not from the work, but from feeling unseen. Her husband walked in, leaned on the counter, and said lightly, "You didn't take my jokes seriously, right? I was just messing around." She looked at him, her face calm. "I know," she said softly. "Don't worry about it." But deep inside, something had shifted. She realized that silence could sometimes speak louder than arguments. That night, as she went to bed, she lay awake thinking. She remembered how she had once dreamed of hosting dinners, where her husband would proudly tell everyone how amazing her cooking was. Instead, she had spent the evening trying not to let her smile fade. The next morning, she woke up earlier than usual. She made breakfast quietly without saying much. Her husband noticed but didn't think much of it. He assumed she had just been tired from all the work. Over the next few days, she went on with her routine, calm and polite. But something about her energy was different. She wasn't as talkative. She wasn't as eager to share her plans or show her cooking experiments. She did everything carefully without seeking praise. The husband didn't notice the small change at first. He thought she was just resting. But in her quiet moments, she began watching more cooking videos, reading about presentation and flavor balance. Not to prove anything to him, but for herself. That dinner had opened her eyes in a way she didn't expect. She realized that sometimes when people don't value your effort, you just need to become so good that no one can laugh at it again. That family dinner became a turning point she didn't talk about. On the outside, it looked like just another night. But inside, she made a decision. She would never let someone else's laughter define her worth again. The next time she cooked for the family, things would be different. Not because she wanted to prove her husband wrong, but because she wanted to prove to herself that she could rise above it all. As she put away the last dish that night, she looked at the quiet dining table and smiled faintly. She knew that this was just the beginning of something new. And though no one else could see it yet, she had already started her silent journey toward change. Days passed after the family dinner, but something inside her felt different. She had smiled through that evening, laughed when others did, and acted as if everything was fine. Yet each word of her husband's joke still echoed in her mind. She didn't cry or complain. Instead, she became quiet, thoughtful. It wasn't anger she felt. It was something deeper, something that made her want to change, not for him, but for herself. Her husband didn't notice much at first. He went about his days as usual, busy with work and his phone. He would joke with her once in a while, not realizing that his words didn't land the same way anymore. When she cooked, he would say, "What's on the menu today, chef?" and laugh, but she would just smile faintly and continue with her work. Her silence made him assume she wasn't bothered. But in truth, she was thinking, planning, and learning quietly. Every night after he went to bed, she stayed awake in the living room with her laptop open. She watched cooking tutorials, studied flavors, and even read articles about how to present food beautifully. She began experimenting with new dishes during the day, sometimes sharing them with neighbors or friends who stopped by. They often praised her cooking, saying she had a real gift for it. Each kind word rebuilt a little piece of her confidence. She started taking notes in a small notebook, what worked, what didn't, and what she wanted to try next. It wasn't just about recipes anymore. It was about finding her identity beyond being a wife or a hostess. She wanted to do something that gave her a sense of pride. One evening, her husband came home from work, tired and hungry. She had made a simple dinner, nothing fancy, just comfort food. When he tasted it, he smiled and said, "This is good." She looked up in surprise. "Really?" she asked. He nodded. "Yeah, much better than that night," he said with a laugh. Her smile faded again, though she didn't let it show. She simply said, "I'm glad you like it," and continued eating quietly. That night, she decided something firmly in her heart. If she was ever laughed at again, it wouldn't be because of what she lacked. It would be because she dared to try. and she would keep trying until there was no reason left for anyone to laugh. The next morning, she saw an ad online for a weekend cooking workshop being held nearby. It was organized by a local chef who had once appeared on television. Something inside her told her to go. She hesitated for a moment, wondering what her husband would say. Then she reminded herself she didn't need permission to learn, so she registered quietly, using some of her own savings. When the day of the workshop came, she woke up early and told her husband she had a small errand. He didn't ask much, just nodded while scrolling through his phone. She left with her bag and notebook, her heart racing with nervous excitement. The workshop was held in a cozy cafe. There were about 15 people there, young, old, beginners, and home cooks like her. The chef who taught the class had an encouraging smile. He told everyone that cooking wasn't just about following recipes. It was about expressing emotion through food. Those words touched her deeply. She realized that's exactly what she had been doing all along, cooking with feeling. During the session, she learned about balancing flavors, using textures, and plating food beautifully. For the first time in a long while, she felt truly alive. The others in the class admired her focus and the creativity in her dishes. When the chef complimented her presentation, saying she had a natural touch, she couldn't stop smiling. After that day, she began to see food differently. Each dish became a canvas. She started cooking with more confidence, experimenting with ingredients she had never used before. She even began taking photos of her creations and posting them online on a small social media page she created. She didn't tell anyone, not even her husband. She wanted it to be something just for her, something pure and personal. At first, only a few people saw her posts, but slowly likes and comments started to appear. Strangers complimented her dishes and asked for recipes. Some even said her food looked professional. Those small comments meant the world to her. They reminded her that she was capable of much more than others believed. One day, her husband's cousin came over unexpectedly. He noticed the aroma from the kitchen and said, "Wow, something smells amazing." She served him a plate and he couldn't stop praising it. "You should really join one of those cooking shows," he said jokingly. Her husband laughed and said, "She's good, but not that good." The cousin looked at her and said, "Don't listen to him. This is restaurant quality." She smiled quietly, grateful for the kind words, even though her husband brushed them off with another laugh. Later that evening, when she was alone, she thought about those words. Maybe she could take part in something bigger. Maybe she could test herself in front of others. The thought scared her a little, but also filled her with excitement. Weeks passed and her social media page grew. People began sharing her dishes, leaving encouraging messages. One morning, she received a message from a local cooking club inviting her to participate in an upcoming contest. The event was open to anyone, home cooks, amateurs, or professionals. The winner would receive a cash prize and an opportunity to feature their recipe in a local magazine. She read the message several times. Her hands trembled a little. She had never done anything like that before, but then she remembered the night of that family dinner, the laughter, and how small she had felt. A soft determination grew in her chest. She replied to the message and registered for the contest. When her husband came home that evening, she almost told him, but something stopped her. Maybe it was fear of another joke, or maybe she just wanted to surprise him later, so she kept it to herself and focused on preparing. Over the next few days, she practiced different recipes. She made lists, tested flavors, and timed herself as if she were already in the contest. The kitchen became her world again, but this time with purpose. She didn't cook out of obligation or fear of judgment. She cooked because she wanted to prove to herself that she could. Her husband noticed her spending more time in the kitchen. "You've been cooking a lot lately," he said casually. "Starting a new restaurant?" He joked again. She smiled gently and replied, "Maybe one day." He laughed, thinking she was kidding. The night before the contest, she barely slept. She packed her ingredients carefully, double-checked her utensils, and prepared everything she would need. She stood by the window for a while, watching the quiet street outside, her heart full of hope. She wasn't expecting fame or fortune. All she wanted was to do her best, to walk into that competition with her head held high. The next morning, she told her husband she was going out for an event. He nodded absent-mindedly, still half asleep. She smiled, grabbed her bag, and stepped out of the house. The air was cool, and she felt a mix of nerves and excitement bubbling inside her. When she reached the event venue, She saw dozens of people, each with their own ingredients and stories. The atmosphere buzzed with energy. As she set up her station, she took a deep breath. This was her moment, quiet, humble, and powerful. She wasn't the same woman who had once stood at her dining table forcing a smile while others laughed. She had changed, grown into someone stronger and more confident. When the contest began, she moved with calm precision. She remembered everything she had learned, balancing spices, layering flavors, and presenting with care. As the judges walked around, she focused only on her dish. The aroma of her food slowly spread through the hall, drawing attention. People passing by stopped to look, some whispering compliments. By the time she finished, her dish looked beautiful, colorful, neatly plated, and full of heart. She looked at it for a long second, smiling to herself. No matter what happened next, she had already won in her own way. She had turned a moment of humiliation into motivation. When her name was called among the top 3 contestants for the final round, she could hardly believe it. Her hands trembled, but her heart was steady. The moment felt surreal. She had started this journey quietly, without anyone's encouragement or support. And now, here she was, standing under the lights, her dish admired, her effort recognized. As the audience clapped, she looked up and took a deep breath. For the first time, she wasn't thinking about her husband's laughter or anyone's approval. She was thinking about herself, her growth, her courage, and her silent determination. She knew this was only the beginning. And no matter what came next, she had already changed the story that had once made her feel small. This time, she was the one holding the pen. The contest day ended late in the evening, and she returned home with tired feet but a bright smile. Her dish had earned praise from the judges, and even though the final results hadn't been announced yet, she already felt victorious. For the first time in a long while, she had done something for herself. She walked quietly into the house, expecting her husband to ask where she had been, but he was still at work. She took a shower, made tea, and sat on the sofa, replaying every moment of the event in her mind. The way people had looked at her food with admiration, the way the judges had nodded with approval. It all felt surreal. Later that night, her husband came home, tired from work. She greeted him with a calm smile and served dinner. He didn't notice her excitement at first. While eating, he said, "This is nice, you've been cooking really well lately." His casual tone made her smile faintly. She wanted to tell him about the contest, but decided to wait until the official announcement. Maybe, she thought, it would be better if he saw the result himself rather than hearing about it halfway. Over the next few days, life went on normally. Her husband remained busy with work and friends. She, however, felt more focused than ever. Every spare minute she had, she spent refining her skills. She started experimenting with presentation styles, adding colors and textures to make each plate more beautiful. Her online page had begun to attract more followers, and people were messaging her to ask for tips. Some even asked if she took orders for small events. Reading those messages filled her heart with quiet pride. Then, one afternoon, while she was folding laundry, she received an email. It was from the contest organizers. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The first line made her heart race. She had made it to the top 5 finalists. The final event would be held the following week, open to the public with judges, media, and a live audience. She couldn't believe it. The girl who had once been mocked at her own dinner table was now going to stand under bright lights, not as a host trying to please others, but as a chef showcasing her passion. She sat in silence for a while, staring at the email. Then a tear slipped down her cheek, not of sadness, but of gratitude. She whispered to herself, "I did it." But she still didn't tell her husband. She wanted the moment to be perfect when he finally found out. The week before the final event, she practiced day and night. Her kitchen became her studio. She tested every element of her dish until it felt flawless. She even practiced her timing, when to start cooking, when to plate, and how to keep calm if something went wrong. Her husband noticed how focused she was. One evening he asked, "You've been working on something secretly, haven't you?" She smiled and replied, "Maybe. You'll find out soon." He laughed, thinking it was one of her little surprises. The day of the final competition arrived. The venue was much bigger than before, filled with bright lights, cameras, and people bustling around. Each contestant had their own cooking station. The smell of sizzling butter, herbs, and roasted spices filled the air. The audience chatted excitedly, waiting for the event to start. She took her position, her hands slightly shaking but her heart calm. She could hear the judges speaking nearby, the sound of clattering pans and the murmurs of the crowd. For a moment she remembered the night of that family dinner, how she had stood quietly, embarrassed, holding back tears while her husband laughed. The memory didn't hurt anymore. It fueled her strength. She took a deep breath and whispered to herself, "This time they'll see who I am." When the timer started, she moved with confidence. Her knife skills were smooth, her ingredients well prepared. Every movement felt natural, almost like a dance. She remembered what the chef at the workshop had told her: cook with emotion, not just technique. So she did. She cooked from her heart. The judges walked around observing the contestants. When they reached her table, one of them smiled and said, "That smells incredible." She thanked him politely, her voice calm but steady. The cameras focused on her, capturing every step. The host announced her name and spoke briefly about how she was a self-taught home cook who had developed her skills from passion. The audience clapped, and she could feel her cheeks warm with pride. As the time ticked away, she plated her dish carefully. It looked beautiful, colorful, balanced, and inviting. She added the final garnish and stepped back. The timer beeped. It was done. She took a deep breath and looked at her creation, smiling softly. This was more than food. It was her journey on a plate. The judges tasted each dish one by one. When they reached hers, she stood quietly, hands folded. They tasted slowly, nodded to each other, and wrote something down. One of them looked up and said, "Your flavors are balanced perfectly. This is comforting and creative at the same time." The audience clapped again. She bowed her head slightly, grateful beyond words. When the tasting ended, all the contestants stood side by side, waiting for the results. The air was filled with tension and excitement. The host took the microphone and began announcing the winners. 5th place, 4th, 3rd, and each name brought applause. Then, the host paused dramatically before announcing the top spot. "The winner of this year's culinary challenge," the host said, "is someone who reminded us that true cooking comes from the heart. Let's congratulate." There was a pause. "She held her breath. Her!" the host exclaimed, calling her name. The hall erupted in applause. Cameras flashed, people cheered, and she stood frozen for a second, hardly believing what she had just heard. Then slowly she walked onto the stage. Her heart pounded as she accepted the award. Tears welled up in her eyes. The judges shook her hand and said, "You deserve this. You've turned simplicity into beauty." At that moment, she thought about all the quiet nights she had spent practicing, all the jokes she had ignored, all the moments she had stayed strong instead of breaking down. Every bit of it had led her here. The event ended late, and she returned home carrying her award gently in her hands. The house was quiet. Her husband was still awake, sitting on the sofa. When she walked in, he looked up and said, "Where have you been?" "I saw something about a cooking contest on the news." His eyes widened when he noticed the award in her hand. "Wait, don't tell me," he said, getting up. She smiled softly and placed the trophy on the table. "Yes," she said quietly. "I won." For a moment he stood speechless. Then he laughed in disbelief, shaking his head. You really did it?" he said, still stunned. She nodded. "Remember that night you joked about my cooking? I decided to get better, not to prove you wrong, but to prove to myself that I could." He looked at her for a long moment, and something shifted in his eyes. It wasn't just surprise, and it was respect. He sat down slowly and said, "I didn't realize my jokes hurt you that much." She smiled again, not bitterly, just softly. "You didn't. But they made me see how much I wanted to grow." He looked down, a little ashamed, then stood and walked toward her. "I'm proud of you," he said sincerely. "I really am." She nodded, grateful for his words, though she didn't need validation anymore. Her worth wasn't tied to anyone's opinion now. She had learned to see it for herself. They sat together for a while in silence. He picked up the trophy and smiled. "This is beautiful," he said. "You deserve it." She leaned back, feeling a sense of peace. It wasn't about the win or the trophy or even the recognition. It was about the journey, the quiet transformation that had taken place inside her. She had gone from being a woman who once doubted herself to someone who had found strength in her silence. Later that night, as they prepared for bed, her husband asked, "So, what's next for you?" She smiled and said, "I don't know yet. But whatever it is, I'm going to give it my best." He laughed softly. "That's my wife," he said, finally understanding what those words truly meant. When she lay down to sleep, she glanced at the trophy on the table near the window. The moonlight reflected softly on its surface. She smiled to herself. It wasn't just a piece of metal. It was a symbol of resilience, of quiet strength, of a journey that started with pain but ended in self-belief. She closed her eyes, knowing that tomorrow would bring new dreams, new possibilities, and maybe even new challenges. But this time she was ready for them all. She had already faced the hardest part, not the laughter of others, but the doubt within herself. And she had won. The next few weeks after her big win were filled with excitement and small surprises. Her story spread quickly in the neighborhood. Friends, relatives, and even people she hadn't spoken to in years sent her messages of congratulations. Some neighbors stopped by just to say they had seen her picture in the local newspaper, smiling proudly with her award. Each compliment felt unreal, like she was living someone else's life. But deep inside, she knew she had earned it through patience, effort, and quiet strength. Her husband had changed too. He was more careful with his words now, more observant. For the first time in years, he helped her set the table, complimented her cooking without adding a joke, and even told his friends proudly about her victory. It was strange at first, hearing him talk about her with respect. The same man who once mocked her food at a family dinner was now telling people, "You should taste my wife's cooking. She's an award-winning chef now." Every time he said it, her heart felt a mix of warmth and disbelief. One evening, they were invited to a family gathering at his parents' home. It had been months since the dinner that changed everything. She felt a little nervous, unsure how everyone would react now. As they walked into the house, she was greeted with smiles, hugs, and cheerful voices. The memory of that awkward night flashed briefly in her mind, but this time it didn't sting. She was no longer the woman who had stood there holding back tears. She was someone new. Her mother-in-law hugged her tightly and said, "We're so proud of you. You've brought honor to our family." Her husband smiled proudly beside her, saying, "I told you she was amazing." Everyone laughed, but the tone was different this time. It was warm, genuine. They sat down together, and her husband's father raised a glass to toast her success. The room filled with applause and cheer. For the first time, she didn't feel small in that house. She felt seen. As the evening went on, the conversation turned to her plans. One of the relatives asked if she would consider opening her own small restaurant or teaching others how to cook. She smiled thoughtfully and said, "Maybe someday. For now, I just want to keep learning and growing." Her husband looked at her proudly, and for once there was no trace of sarcasm in his tone when he said, "She can do anything she sets her mind to." Later that night, as they drove home, she looked out the window, watching the city lights pass by. Her husband glanced at her and said, "I didn't realize until recently how strong you are. I used to think cooking was just something simple, but you turned it into something powerful." She smiled softly and said, "It's not about the food. It's about what you put into it. Your patience, your care, your heart." He nodded slowly, understanding more than he ever had before. Over the next few months, new opportunities began to appear. A local magazine reached out to her for an interview. Then a small cafe offered to feature one of her signature dishes on their menu. She couldn't believe how much her life had changed. The woman who once doubted herself now had people trusting her skills and asking for her advice. She worked hard, always staying humble. Every morning, she practiced new recipes, tried different combinations, and photographed her dishes beautifully for her growing online followers. Her page had become popular now. People loved her simple approach, her honesty, and her story of transformation. Many women messaged her, saying her journey gave them hope. That meant more to her than any trophy could. Her husband became her biggest supporter. He often accompanied her to events, carried her cooking equipment, and even helped her shoot short videos for her page. Their relationship began to heal slowly. The laughter between them returned, not the mocking kind, but genuine joy. He finally understood how much his earlier words had hurt her, and he made sure to never make that mistake again. One day she received an invitation to appear as a guest judge at a local food fair. She was surprised. The same kind of event she had once nervously joined as a contestant now wanted her as a guest. She showed the letter to her husband, who grinned and said, "See? I told you you're becoming famous." She laughed lightly, shaking her head. "Fame doesn't matter. I just want to keep doing what I love." At the food fair, she was treated with great respect. The organizers welcomed her warmly, and the contestants looked up to her. As she walked around tasting dishes, she saw a young woman standing nervously at one of the stalls. The woman reminded her of herself years ago, shy, anxious, but full of hope. She stopped by, tasted the dish, and smiled. "This is really good," she said. The young woman's eyes lit up. "Thank you," she whispered. "I was so nervous." She gently placed a hand on her shoulder and said, "Don't be. Cook from your heart. That's all that matters." The young woman smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. In that moment, she realized how far she had come, from being the one seeking encouragement to being the one giving it. When she returned home that night, her husband had set up the dining table with candles and her favorite flowers. She looked surprised. He smiled and said, "I thought we could celebrate, not your success, but the person you've become." She felt tears in her eyes as she sat down. He poured her a glass of juice and said softly, "You've taught me something important. Sometimes words can either break someone or build them. I wish I had known that sooner." She looked at him and said, "You know it now. That's what matters." They ate together, sharing stories, laughter, and quiet gratitude. It wasn't a grand celebration, but it was full of meaning. In the weeks that followed, she continued doing what she loved, cooking, creating, and inspiring others. Her story became a quiet example of how strength doesn't always come from shouting or fighting back, but sometimes from staying calm and rising higher. Her husband, who once failed to see her worth, now looked at her with admiration and respect every single day. One afternoon, as she sat on the porch sipping tea, her husband joined her. "You've changed so much," he said gently. She smiled and replied, "Maybe I didn't change. Maybe I just became who I was meant to be." He nodded, looking thoughtful. "I think we both changed," he said. She looked at him, smiling because she knew he was right. The next weekend, they hosted another family dinner. This time she cooked with calm confidence, not to impress anyone, but because she loved it. The table was filled with delicious food, and everyone praised her dishes again. Her husband, sitting beside her, raised his glass and said, "To my wife, the best cook and the strongest person I know." Everyone clapped, and she felt her eyes water a little. She looked around the table, remembering the night that had once made her feel so small. Now in the same setting, she felt powerful and content. It wasn't revenge or pride, and it was peace. After everyone left, she stood in the quiet kitchen, looking at the empty plates and the warm glow of the lights. Her husband came up behind her and said, "You've come full circle." She smiled, placing her hand over his. "Yes," she said softly. "But the difference is, this time I'm smiling for real." He pulled her into a gentle hug, whispering, "You deserve every bit of happiness." She closed her eyes, letting the words sink in. They were no longer empty or casual. They were real. That night, as she lay in bed, she thought about how life had changed in ways she never expected. It all started with a moment that had hurt her deeply, but it became the reason she found her true strength. She realized that sometimes pain pushes us to discover parts of ourselves we never knew existed. She drifted off to sleep with a peaceful heart, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dreams, and more chances to grow. Whatever the future held, she was ready, because now she believed in herself, and that made all the difference. Months passed after that memorable dinner, and life moved forward in the calmest, happiest way it had ever been for both of them. The house felt warmer now, not because of the lights or the decorations, but because of the peace that filled every corner. They laughed more, cooked together, and shared small moments that once would have gone unnoticed. It was as if life had given them both a second chance, and this time, they were not taking it for granted. She had grown busier with her cooking projects. Her online page kept growing every day, and people were reaching out from different places asking her to share recipes or tips. She never imagined that something which once made her cry in silence would become the reason for her success. Every message she received felt like a small piece of healing. It reminded her that kindness and patience always win in the end. One morning, while she was preparing breakfast, her husband came to her with a bright look on his face. He said, "You won't believe this. The city community center wants to hold a food festival next month, and they've asked if you could lead a cooking workshop. She paused, the spoon in her hand mid-air, her heart skipping a beat. A workshop? She asked, surprised. Me? He nodded. Yes, they said they've seen your work online. They think you'd be perfect to guide others. She laughed softly, shaking her head. I'm not a professional chef. He smiled and replied, You don't need to be. You just have to be yourself. That's what people love about you. His words touched her. She realized that the man standing before her was not the same person who once mocked her at a family dinner. He had learned to see her heart, her effort, and her value. It made her eyes fill with quiet emotion. The following weeks were filled with preparation for the workshop. She spent hours planning simple recipes that anyone could make at home. Her husband helped with organizing ingredients and setting up her space. They worked as a team, laughing and teasing each other as they packed boxes of spices and utensils. It felt like they were writing a new chapter together, one full of support and respect. On the day of the food festival, the hall was buzzing with energy. There were stalls everywhere, filled with delicious smells and happy chatter. Her workshop was set up in the center of the event, and a small crowd had already gathered to watch her cook. She took a deep breath before stepping forward, feeling her heart race. Her husband stood nearby, giving her an encouraging nod. That one look was all she needed to steady herself. As she began to speak, she shared not only her recipes but also small pieces of her story, about how she once struggled to find confidence, how she learned that true cooking came from love, and how patience could turn mistakes into masterpieces. The audience listened intently, some smiling, others nodding in agreement. She cooked with grace and joy, her movements calm and confident. When the dish was ready, she invited a few people to taste it, and their delighted reactions filled her with quiet pride. Her husband watched from the side, his eyes soft with admiration. For him, this was more than just a cooking session. It was a moment of realization, a reminder of how far they had come since that painful night. He couldn't stop thinking about how he had once embarrassed her in front of everyone. Now she stood here, admired and respected by a crowd. It was humbling and beautiful all at once. After the event, many people came to thank her and take photos. One woman told her, I stopped cooking because I lost confidence. But after hearing you, I think I'll start again. That sentence stayed with her. It made her realize how her small act of courage could inspire others to rediscover their strength. She smiled warmly and said, Never stop doing what you love. The result doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be yours. When the festival ended, she and her husband sat quietly in their car, exhausted but happy. He looked at her and said softly, You've changed so many lives today. She shook her head with a gentle smile. No, she said. I just reminded them of something they already knew. He reached over and held her hand. And you reminded me too, he added. They drove home in silence, both lost in thoughts of gratitude.